A trip to the hair salon backfiring. Footage obtained by FoxNews.com shows House Speaker Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done, not wearing a mask, inside a San Francisco salon despite local rules ordering them to be closed. The salon's owner blasting Pelosi, saying it's a slap in the face that she can break rules while others are restricted. Pelosi's office saying in a statement the speaker always wears a mask and complies with local COVID requirements. This business offered for the speaker to come in on Monday and told her they were allowed by the city to have one customer at a time in the business. The speaker complied with the rules as presented to her by this establishment.
Nancy Pelosi decided to get her hair done in a San Francisco salon in the state of California, where there are laws and restrictions about in-salon hair care. Then she goes in without a mask. Knowing these precautions had to be met, she's already illegal. Now, she can go back and forth about who was right, who was wrong, but it's not the point. The point is, through this story, there's already two lies being told. One, the owner said she was illegal. Two, Nancy Pelosi said she was okay. Three, no one's supposed to be in that salon, period. Neither the employees either. But it was no coincidence that they made this story drop as soon as that bill reached Gavin Newsom's desk to be signed Monday night.
Do you know who works hard for me and you? He's tall and smart and true. Scott Wiener's the one who fights a champion, working day and night for what he knows is right. 'Cause Scott's the one who'll do the work. He's always shown us what he's worth. Scott for Senate, oh, oh, oh. Our voice in Sacramento, oh, oh.
Scott Wiener is an openly gay Jewish Democratic Senator of California. He uses most of his political power for bills that allows transgenders, criminals, to decide what sex they identify with before going into penitentiaries. A bill that allows San Francisco and Oakland to extend their bar hours up to 4 a.m. As a sitting senator participates in all of the festivals that glorify his sexual identity, this particular festival or fair called Up Your Alley, where they dress in S&M and BDSM gear, sex stuff. This really isn't a shocker. Harvey Milk was also an openly gay Jewish politician in the state of California, specifically San Francisco, who served the same ideals as Scott Wiener. Sadly, he was assassinated. But if he was alive today, he would be doing the same exact thing as Scott Wiener is doing in the Democratic seat as a senator. Sean Penn was in a movie that portrayed him called Milk. California lawmakers approved bills to address racism in criminal charges and jury selection. September 2nd, Scott tweets, "Racism in our criminal justice system doesn't end with policing. It also affects our jury system. We passed key reforms to make juries more diverse. I authored one bill to expand jury pools and helped pass one to end racially motivated jury challenges. But current state law prohibits preemptory challenges based solely on an assumption that a prospective juror was biased due to the person's race, religion, gender, or similar grounds." That bill is not going to get passed, and they know they won't get passed. He's trying to pretend he's an ally for the African American community in the midst of what's going on with police brutality, that they have not decided to make any laws, any acts, or any bills protecting African Americans from police brutality. What he's trying to do is making sure that you know that he's trying to be an ally for you while passing his laws and bills. They know you can't prove in a jury selection if someone's basing their verdict off race, gender, or color. There's no proof you can do that. So that bill is going to sit on the assembly floor forever.
File item 49, SB 145. The clerk will read.
Senate Bill 145 by Senator Wiener and Accolade to Sex Offenders.
Ms. Kamlager, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise to present Senate Bill 145, which will end California's highly discriminatory treatment of specific sex acts by our state sex offender registry law by giving courts discretion over all cases of voluntary intercourse between teenagers and young adults. Under current law, if a young person has voluntary sexual intercourse with a minor aged 14 through 17 and is no more than 10 years older than the minor, the offense is not automatically registerable. However, the court has discretion based on the facts of the case to decide whether or not to place the defendant on the sex offender registry. On the other hand, if any other sex act is performed, then it is mandatory that the court place the defendant on the sex offender registry regardless of the facts of the case. This disparate treatment of these sex acts is a vestige from the anti-LGBT laws in the 1940s that criminalized gay sex. Tragically, in 2019, our laws still mandate that a young person in a consensual relationship who is convicted of performing these specific sex acts must be placed on the sex offender registry, and our courts are barred from using discretion, the word we like so much, to keep them off, even though a similarly situated young person convicted of statutory rape wouldn't have the same restriction. This distinction in the law is irrational and discriminatory towards LGBT youth, as it treats these acts as more egregious of a crime than statutory rape. SB 145 ends blatant discrimination against young people engaged in voluntary sexual activity by giving courts the discretion to decide at sentencing if registering the defendant as a sex offender is appropriate, regardless of the sex act they performed. To be clear, nothing in this bill decriminalizes any of these offenses or prevents anyone from being placed on the registry if a prosecutor recommends it or the court orders it. SB 45 is a law enforcement sponsored and supported bill. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Kamlager. Ms. Gonzalez, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I unfortunately am rising in opposition to this bill, and I wouldn't have spoken except that people have misconstrued my opposition, so I want to be very clear. The equity argument that Equality California and others have promoted for this bill, I completely agree with. In fact, I agree with it so much that the amendments that they gave me to take in appropriations, which would have still created a two-tier system, I refuse to take, because it is about equitable solutions. Any sex is sex. I don't care who it's between or what sex act it is. That being said, I cannot, in my mind as a mother, understand how sex between a 24-year-old and a 14-year-old could ever be consensual, how it could ever not be a registerable offense. I don't care what kind of sex it is. I don't care if it's traditional. I'm not going to go there. But the bottom line is, when a 24-year-old has sex with a 14-year-old, it is always in an inequitable situation. Most of the time, it's a teacher and student. It might be a Bible study instructor, a coach, and a student. I've had 14-year-olds. I've asked everybody, as this has sat in my committee for 2 years, amend both sides of the bill. Amend the current situation where one sex act between a 24 and a 14-year-old might be considered consensual by a judge, and amend this so we can have equity, because it should be equitable. But we should never give up on this idea that children should be in any way subject to a predator. And that's what it is. I cannot, and I've never heard, and I've challenged everybody, give me a situation where a 24-year-old had sex with a 14-year-old, any kind of sex, and it wasn't predatory. Any example, and I've yet to see it. I have been the mother of a 14-year-old over and over and over again, and I'm sorry. Until you can show me that, I can't vote for this bill. As much as I want to create an equitable situation, I think this needs to go back to the drawing board. I think we need to take up both portions of the code and make a determination. I understand it leaves it up to a judge. It leaves it up to a judge. I still have never seen a single instance by which a 24-year-old should be having sex with a 14-year-old. With that, I respectfully ask for no vote.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Mr. Choi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Speaker and the members of the Assembly. I stand today in opposition of SB 145. Colleagues, as a lifelong educator, we place adults in places of trust with the youth and the children. In an age of historic sex trafficking and child trafficking here in California, I think this bill is entirely inappropriate. I don't understand why a 24-year-old volunteer coach should not have to register as a sex offender for being with a 15-year-old student. Statutory rape should be a registrable offense either way, and by lowering this offense, colleagues, we are signaling to families and the children everywhere that we support these abusive situations. If you look at the summary of this bill, it provides that the persons convicted of sodomy, oral copulation, or sex penetration by foreign object under specified provisions of law would not be required to register as sex offenders if at the time of offense the person is not more than 10 years older than the minor, and the conviction is only one requiring the person to register. I mean, this is unbelievable. What kind of a bill is this? What kind of a law are we trying to enact by this body? This is intolerable. It is for those reasons that I respectively beg you to vote no against this bill.
If you want to know why this Democratic Assembly member is going so hard for this bill, being an African-American woman, is because she's a Zeta, a Order of the Eastern Star, or Prince Hall Freemason is why.
No worries, thank you. I want to just reiterate that there is still judicial discretion in this bill. Some folks mentioned the 10-year cap. The 10-year cap is actually consistent with current law, and if folks are challenged with that, I actually urge in next legislative session to do a bill that focuses on that 10-year gap, but that is not this bill. SB 145 does not change the offenses for sex crimes with a minor. This bill does not decriminalize any kind of sexual criminal acts. It allows prosecutors to continue placing offenders on the sex offender registry. As was mentioned, it is supported and in fact sponsored by law enforcement. And I want to just say that if, a 19-year-old has consensual sex with a 17-year-old and something goes awry in the relationship, that 19-year-old gay child will be put on the sex offender registry. It will be mandatory. And we talk so much about how we support LGBT rights. How would you feel having to tell the parent of that 19-year-old that they deserve to be on the sex registry for life because they're gay? That is essentially what we would be saying. And that is what we are fighting against when we vote for SB 145. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. Ayes 41, noes 18. The measure passes.
That bill process took 20 minutes. And it ended up on Gavin Newsom's desk Monday night, and he signed off on it. And then he tried to cover it up with some Nancy Pelosi drama. Out of the same state, out of the same city, from the same party. And you guys are still convinced, you black folk are still convinced that the Democratic Party is actually going to vote laws, bills, acts that protects you from police brutality? I keep showing you and telling you who's in control of making pedophilia come alive again. Who's protecting them? It's only two communities.